The first time he called, my blood ran cold. The voice on the other end of the line was a man's, rough and accented, and it spoke my name like a curse. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. I knew who he was. He was the ghost I had been told was long gone, the phantom ex-husband. Except he wasn't a ghost, and he certainly wasn't an ex. He was very real, and he was calling me from halfway around the world to deliver a single, simple message. $5,000, he said, the words slithering through the phone. Or I send the photos to your daughter. I tell her what her sainted father has been doing. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird trying to escape. I was 52 years old, a widower from Ohio, a man who had lived a quiet, respectable life. And now I was being blackmailed by a man whose wife I was in love with. A woman I never knew was married. This is the story of how my search for a second chance at happiness led me into a nightmare, a carefully constructed trap of love, lies, and extortion. It's a story I have to tell, not just for myself, but for anyone out there who thinks loneliness can't be weaponized against them. Before we dive into the wreckage of my life, if you find yourself drawn to stories that explore the complexities of the human heart and the darkness that can hide behind a beautiful smile, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us bring these important narratives to light. My life, before Mila, was painted in shades of grey. My wife, Sarah, had passed away 2 years prior, after a long, brutal fight with cancer. We had been married for 28 years. She was my everything, my high school sweetheart, my best friend, my partner in building a life, a family. Our house in the suburbs of Cleveland, once filled with the laughter of our daughter Jessica and the warmth of dinner parties, became an echo chamber. The silence was deafening. Every corner held a memory, every object a story that now ended in sorrow. I was an architect, semi-retired. I had designed buildings that reached for the sky, but I couldn't seem to construct a future for myself. My days fell into a listless routine. Wake up, coffee, stare out the window, maybe a walk in the park where Sarah and I are said to stroll, then back to the crushing silence of the house. Jessica, my daughter, was a doctor living in Oregon. She called me every Sunday, her voice a lifeline, but I was careful to keep the depths of my loneliness from her. I didn't want to be a burden. She had her own life, a demanding career. So I would say, "I'm fine, honey, keeping busy." It was a lie. I wasn't busy. I was drowning. The loneliness was a physical ache, a constant companion that sat beside me in Sarah's empty chair at the dinner table. Some nights I would talk to her, telling her about my day, about the leaky faucet I finally fixed, about the cardinal that kept visiting the bird feeder. But the only reply was the hum of the refrigerator. I was adrift, a ship without a rudder, and I yearned for a lighthouse, for any kind of light to guide me out of the fog of my grief. It was in this state of quiet desperation, late one Tuesday night in October of 2023, that I typed international dating sites into my computer. I wasn't looking for a replacement for Sarah. That was impossible. I was just looking for a conversation, for a connection, for a reason to feel something other than hollow. That's when I saw her profile. Her name was Mila. She was from a small province in the Philippines. Her profile picture showed a woman with a smile that seemed to radiate genuine warmth. She had long, dark hair and eyes that sparkled with a light I felt I had lost forever. She was 34 years old, a single mother to a young son. Her profile was simple, written in slightly broken English that I found endearing. She wrote about her love for her family, her dream of finding a good, honest man to share her life with, and her faith. She wasn't a model or an actress. She worked as a clerk in a local store. She seemed real, down to earth. I hesitated for a long time, my finger hovering over the send message button. What was I, a man in his 50s from suburban America, doing? This was foolish. But then I looked around my silent living room at the ghosts of my past life and I clicked the button. I wrote a simple, honest message, introducing myself and telling her I was drawn to her warm smile. I didn't expect a reply, but the next morning there it was. Her message was full of warmth and curiosity. She asked about my life, my work, my daughter. She seemed genuinely interested. We started exchanging messages every day, Those messages soon turned into long emails, and then nervously, we scheduled our first video call. I remember my hands shaking as I waited for her to appear on the screen. And then she was there, her smile even more radiant than in her photo. We talked for 2 hours. Her voice was soft and musical. She laughed easily. She told me about her son Miguel, about the struggles of life in her village, about her dream of one day giving him a better future. For the first time in 2 years, I felt a spark, a genuine human connection that wasn't tinged with pity or sorrow. Mayla saw me not as a grieving widower, but as Robert, a man with stories to tell and a heart that was, apparently, not completely broken. Our calls became a daily ritual, the highlight of my otherwise monotonous existence. She was my sunrise and my sunset. We fell into a rhythm of romance that felt both thrilling and deeply comforting. Our connection deepened with astonishing speed. Within weeks we were saying "I love you." It felt fast, I know, but my lonely heart drank her affection like a man dying of thirst. She made me feel young again, wanted, alive. The grey world I inhabited began to fill with colour, all painted by her words, her laughter, her promises of a future together. She would send me photos of her day, the market in her town, the beach near her village, her son Miguel playing with a makeshift toy car. I felt like I was part of her life, even from 8,000 miles away. Then the first red flag appeared, though at the time I saw it only as a cry for help. Her mother, she told me through tears during one of our video calls, had fallen ill with dengue fever. The hospital bills were piling up and she didn't know what to do. She never directly asked for money, that was the art of it. She just presented the problem, her face a mask of worry and despair. "I will handle it, my love," she would say bravely. "I will find a way." Of course, I couldn't let her struggle alone. I was her man, wasn't I? I sent her $500 through a wire transfer service. The relief and gratitude in her voice when she called to thank me was intoxicating. I felt like a hero, her knight in shining armour. A few weeks later, it was a typhoon that had damaged the roof of their small family home. Another $800. Then her son needed a special tutor for school. $200. Each request was wrapped in a dramatic, emotional story of struggle and survival. My rational mind, the architect who planned every detail, would sometimes whisper warnings. Was this real? But my heart, so starved for affection, would shout the doubts down. I was helping the woman I loved. What was wrong with that? I asked her about her ex-husband, the father of her son. The story was always the same, though the details were vague. He was a bad man, she said, abusive, a drinker. He had abandoned her and their son years ago and was long gone. She spoke of him with such fear and disgust that I never pressed for details. I just wanted to protect her from that painful past, to be the man who would never hurt her. I was building a future with her in my mind, and in that future there was no room for him. I was so focused on being her saviour that I failed to see I was becoming her primary source of income. The lines were blurring, but I was too blinded by love, or perhaps by my own desperate need to be needed, to see the pattern that was emerging. The next logical step in my mind was to close the distance between us. The daily video calls and constant messaging were no longer enough. I needed to hold her, to see her world with my own eyes, to prove to myself and to her that what we had was real. I booked a flight to the Philippines for a 3-week visit in March of 2024. The cost of the ticket was nothing compared to the excitement bubbling inside me. Mayla was ecstatic. We spent hours planning every detail. I would stay in a hotel in the nearest city, but I would spend my days with her and her family in her village. The dependency, which had started emotionally and shifted to financial, was about to become physical. I was all in. The moment I stepped out of the Ninoy Aquino International Airport in Manila, the heat and humidity hit me like a physical blow. The air was thick with the smell of diesel, street food, and a million people living their lives at a fever pitch. It was a world away from the manicured lawns and quiet streets of Ohio. After a long bus ride, I finally arrived in her province. She was waiting for me at the terminal, looking even more beautiful than on screen. When she ran into my arms, all my doubts, all my anxieties melted away. This was real. The first week was a whirlwind of bliss. I met her family, her mother, her sisters, her cousins, and her son Miguel, a shy but sweet little boy. They welcomed me with open arms, treating me like royalty. I was the rich American, the man who was going to save Mila. I showered them with gifts. I took them out to restaurants they could never afford. I paid for repairs on their home, bought them a new television, and made sure their cupboards were always full. I was in love, and I expressed that love the only way I knew how, by providing. I was spending thousands of dollars, but it felt good. It felt right. I was building a foundation for our future. I was showing her family that I was a serious, committed man. Mila was constantly by my side, her hand in mine, whispering how much she loved me, how I was an angel sent from heaven. My emotional dependency on her grew with every passing day. Her approval, her happiness became my primary motivation. I was no longer just Robert, the grieving widower. I was Mila's hero, Miguel's potential new father, the hope of an entire family. I was so caught up in the role she had created for me that I didn't realise the entire stage had been built with my own money. The relationship was no longer just about two people finding each other, it had become a transaction, and I was the only one paying. The third week of my trip was drawing to a close. I was sitting with Mila on the small porch of her family's home one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and purple. My flight back to Ohio was in 2 days, and the thought of leaving her filled me with a profound sadness. I had made up my mind. I was going to start the K-1 visa process as soon as I got home. I wanted her and Miguel with me in America. I turned to her, my heart full, and began to speak of our future, of marriage, of a life together. As I spoke, her beautiful smile faltered. A flicker of something I couldn't identify, fear perhaps, crossed her face. Before she could respond, a man appeared at the gate of their small yard. He was short, wiry, with angry eyes that were fixed on us. He started shouting in Tagalog, his voice raw with fury. Mila jumped to her feet, her body tense. Her mother and sisters came rushing out of the house, trying to placate him. "Who is that?" I asked, my own body tensing in response to the palpable aggression. "It's nothing, my love," Mila said, her voice trembling. "It is just my cousin. He is drunk." But I knew she was lying. The man's rage was too personal. He wasn't looking at her family. He was looking at me. The argument escalated until one of her brothers finally managed to lead the man away. The idyllic evening was shattered. Later that night, Mila gave me a revised version of the truth. The man was her ex-husband, Rico. He wasn't gone, as she had claimed. He lived in a nearby village and sometimes came around to cause trouble, especially when he was drinking. She wept as she told me, saying she was too scared and ashamed to tell me the truth. I held her, comforted her, and told her we would face him together. My hero complex kicked in again, but a seed of doubt had been planted. The next day, while Mila was at the market, I saw a folder of official-looking documents on a small table in the living room. My curiosity, now a gnawing suspicion, got the better of me. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were birth certificates, school records, and one other document. It was a marriage certificate. I used a translation app on my phone to read the details. The names were Mila Santos and Rico Reyes. The date of marriage was less than a year ago, 2023. They were not divorced, they were not separated, they were married. The floor fell out from under me. Every word she had ever said, every "I love you," every tear she had shed, it was all a lie. I wasn't her saviour, I was her affair. I was the fool from Ohio, the walking, talking ATM machine. And her husband was very much in the picture. The feeling wasn't anger, not at first. It was a profound, hollow shock, the kind that makes the world go silent and leaves you unable to breathe. I had flown 8,000 miles and spent thousands of dollars to be with a woman who belonged to another man. Have you ever been in a situation where the reality you believed in was completely shattered? Or have you known someone who was deceived so deeply? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story is resonating with you, please subscribe to the channel to support more content like this. The confrontation was quiet, almost anticlimactic. I didn't shout, I didn't scream. I just sat her down and placed the marriage certificate on the table between us. Her face went pale. The performance was over. The tears she cried this time felt different, desperate. She confessed everything. Rico wasn't just her husband, he was her partner in this scheme. They were in it together. Their life was hard, she said, and they were desperate. They saw me, a lonely older American man, as a way out. Her job was to make me fall in love with her. His job was to stay in the shadows until now. The next day, Rico returned. This time he was sober and chillingly calm. He sat across from me at the same table, a smug look on his face. He was the one who called me. He told me he knew everything. He had seen all the messages, knew about every dollar I had sent. He wasn't the jealous husband. He was the business manager. "You like my wife?" he asked, his voice laced with contempt. "She is very beautiful, yes? Very good at making a man feel special. But she is expensive. You want to keep seeing her? You want to bring her to America? It will cost you." That's when the blackmail began. It wasn't just the $5,000 from the initial call. That was just the opening bid. He laid out the terms, a monthly allowance for him to compensate for his emotional distress, a large lump sum to pay for the annulment, a long and costly process in the Philippines. And if I refused, he had screenshots of our intimate conversations. He had photos I had sent. He had photos of me with Mila, looking like a happy couple. He would send them all to my daughter, Jessica. He would post them on my social media for all my friends and former colleagues to see. "Old man from America stealing a poor Filipino's wife," he said with a cruel smile. "It is not a good look for you." I was trapped. I was in their country, on their turf. My control over the situation had evaporated. I felt a wave of nausea. The woman I had dreamed of building a life with was sitting silently beside her husband, a willing participant in my humiliation. I was no longer a hero or a lover. I was a mark, a victim. The pressure was immense, a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to think, hard to breathe. For 24 hours, I was paralysed by fear and shame. I stayed in my hotel room, the curtains drawn, replaying every moment of the last few months in my head. Every loving word from Mila now felt like a calculated move in a cruel game. I considered paying them. Just give them the money, I thought, and maybe they'll disappear. But I knew with a sickening certainty that it would never end. This would be my life now, making monthly payments to a man for the privilege of being deceived by his wife. The shame of telling my daughter felt worse than the financial loss. How could I explain this? How could I admit that my loneliness had made me so foolish, so blind? But then something inside me shifted. A tiny ember of defiance started to glow in the ashes of my humiliation. I was a victim, but I would not be a victim forever. I thought of Sarah, of the dignity and strength with which she faced her illness. What would she think of me now, cowering in a hotel room, being extorted by two grifters? The decision came to me not in a rush of anger, but in a moment of cold, quiet clarity. I was not going to pay them a single cent more. I was going to escape. My first call was not to the police. I was a foreigner, and this was a he said, she said situation I couldn't possibly win. My first call was to the US Embassy in Manila. I explained my situation in vague but urgent terms, asking for advice. They couldn't intervene directly in a personal dispute, but the person on the phone gave me practical advice. Ensure my passport was secure, book a flight home immediately, and do not engage further with the individuals. My second call was the hardest. I called Jessica. My voice broke as I told her everything. I didn't spare myself. I told her about Mila, the money, the lies, the marriage certificate, the blackmail. I braced myself for her disappointment, for her anger. But what I heard on the other end of the line was not judgment, it was concern. "Dad, are you okay? Are you safe?" she asked, her voice steady and strong. After the initial shock, she became my anchor. "Get on the next flight out of there, Dad. We'll figure out the money. Just come home." Her support was the fuel I needed. While Rico and Mila were sending me threatening text messages, I was online, booking a one-way ticket to Cleveland for the very next morning. I packed my bags, my hands still trembling, but this time with purpose. I would not be their prisoner. My escape wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was a quiet act of rebellion, a flight towards self-preservation. I would leave their trap and their country behind and fly back to the silence of my own home. Landing back in Cleveland was a surreal experience. The familiar grey skies of Ohio had never looked so beautiful. The silence in my house, which I had fled from months ago, now felt like a sanctuary. I was safe, but I was not okay. The emotional fallout was catastrophic. The shame was a constant heavy cloak I couldn't take off. I felt like the world's biggest fool. How could I, an intelligent, educated man, have fallen for such a classic scam? The truth was, it wasn't my intelligence that had been compromised. It was my heart. My grief and loneliness had been the unlocked doors through which they had walked. I blocked Mila's and Rico's numbers. I deleted all my social media accounts. For weeks I lived like a hermit, terrified they would find a way to follow through on their threats. They never did. Their power over me was based on my proximity and my fear. Once I was gone, I was no longer a viable target. The financial loss was significant. I calculated I had sent them close to $20,000 in total, but the emotional cost was far greater. My ability to trust had been shattered. I looked at everyone with suspicion. A friendly cashier, a kind neighbour. Was everyone hiding something? I felt broken, tainted by the experience. Jessica convinced me to see a therapist, a specialist in grief and trauma. It was one of the best decisions I ever made. Slowly, painfully, I began to unpack what had happened. I had to confront the real reason I had fallen for Mila's trap. I wasn't just looking for love, I was trying to outrun my grief. I wanted a shortcut through the pain of losing Sarah, and Mila had offered me a beautiful, deceptive detour. The work was hard. It involved sitting with my grief, truly feeling it for the first time instead of trying to patch the hole in my heart with a new person. It involved forgiving myself for my foolishness, for my vulnerability. I started rebuilding my life, one small, deliberate step at a time. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected. I started volunteering at a local community centre, using my architectural skills to help design a new playground. I wasn't looking for a relationship. I was learning to be in a relationship with myself again, to find contentment in my own company, in the quiet, steady rhythm of a life honestly lived. It has been over a year now since I fled the Philippines. The scars are still there, but they no longer ache with the same intensity. They are reminders of a painful lesson, but also of my own resilience. I survived. I learned that true healing doesn't come from finding someone to fill an empty space in your life. It comes from rebuilding yourself from the inside out until you are whole on your own. My loneliness had made me vulnerable, a perfect target for those who prey on the hopeful and the grieving. They sold me a fantasy, a beautifully packaged lie, because they knew it was what my broken heart wanted to buy. The most important lesson I learned was this. You must be brutally honest with yourself about your own motivations. Was I in love with Mila, the person, or was I in love with the idea of being loved again, the idea of escaping my pain? Looking back, I see it was the latter. She was a mirror, and what I fell in love with was a reflection of my own desperate need. My life today is quiet, but it is not empty. It is filled with purpose, with genuine connections with my daughter and my friends, and with a newfound peace. I no longer fear the silence. I have made peace with the ghosts of my past. To anyone listening who might be feeling lost or lonely, I want to say this. Be careful. Guard your heart, but do not close it off forever. The world is full of beauty and genuine connection, but it also contains darkness and deception. The best defense against those who would exploit your vulnerability is to first find strength and contentment within yourself. Your wholeness is a shield they cannot penetrate. There is hope after betrayal, there is life after grief, and sometimes the most important journey you can take is the one back to yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you or if you know someone who needs to hear it, please consider subscribing and leaving a comment. We read all of them. Stay tuned for more stories that explore the depths of human experience.